Okay, part 2, uncovering the missing secrets of light. So, now we've uncovered the fact that electromagnetism by itself is impossible. Self-induction is impossible. We know that magnetism is the termination, is the radiation, is the polarization in discharge of dielectricity or electricity. Now, electricity doesn't terminate into magnetism. Electricity terminates as magnetism. But we know magnetism on its own cannot create electricity. It's impossible. It is impossible. The math is right here. Nobody's ever disproved his work. My experiments prove it. How am I able to deflect light by using magnetism? I mean, I was doing this 5 years ago. I mean, this was in my book. I mean, I knew this was true 5 years ago. Or was it 5 or 6 years ago? But I needed more proof. I needed more evidences and experiments. Everything over here is spatial and radiative. Electromagnetic self-induction is impossible. It cannot exist. It cannot explain the photoelectric effect. It is impossible. Electricity terminates as magnetism. If you were able to have an electromagnetic system, it would immediately vanish before it was ever created. It needs a dielectric radial component to even exist. It's so unfortunate that he draws the same conclusions, but he never mentions this. It seems that Tesla knew this, and this might have been part of his private notes, but we'll never know that. But the wave-particle duality is a nonsense. This is mass. This is matter. Dielectricity terminates into, in stellar and galactic formations, the creation of mass matter. That is why a packet, or the quanta of light, quantum BS again, a quanta of light seems to act over shorter distances like a particle. Well, they don't understand what light is. It has another component, a z-axis radiodielectric. This is the creation of electricity. Phi times psi equals Q, Planck, electrification. Electricity and magnetism cannot exist as a self-inducing system. It is impossible. Maxwell said as much. Faraday said as much, although not in those specific terms. What? Let's quote Dr. Oleg again from Faraday. The electric field here clearly says Maxwell that is, as far as the electric field that is induced, that the induced electromotive force is measured by but not caused by the changing magnetic field. Just as Faraday, he made no allusion to any causal link between magnetic and electric fields. He never so much as suggested that the induced currents were a result of changing magnetic fields. On the contrary, he clearly associated the phenomena of electromagnetic induction with changing electrical currents. What that means is actually changing dielectric currents or pulses. According to these equations, time variable systems, electric and magnetic fields are always created simultaneously. Well, that's impossible. This is exactly what Faraday and Maxwell said. So, electromagnetism is impossible unless you add the missing component, which makes up light, which is dielectricity. This is light, not electromagnetism, but dielectromagnetism. These are the three necessary components, transverse radial dielectric of light. That is the only way light can exist. It is the only thing that explains away wave-particle duality BS. This is what is incorrectly called a quanta of light, okay? Right here. Let's wall this off. They call this a wave packet, or a quanta of light. It has wave-like properties, and it has particle-like properties. Well, that's right, because, you idiot, it has a radial dielectric pulse. This whole system, I call it QM or quasi-matter, is almost exactly like an atom. Electrical magnetic component nucleus-like dielectric. Remember, dielectricity terminates into the creation of mass matter. In stellar galactic formations, galactic jets, etc. That is where the wave-particle duality nonsense comes from. That is the explanation of the Faraday effect. Self-induction, self-propagation is impossible. This quanta, called the photon, is a brain fart. It doesn't exist. This is what they call a photon. It's not a photon. It is a dielectric pulse resultant to the electromagnetic creation and induction of that pulse, which is dependent upon and proportional to the wavelength and the frequency. Let's use a quick way of drawing it without having to use transverse waves. Pulse, 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 pulse. Pulse, 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 pulse. Look. Oh my God, what's this? Well, this would be white light. My recent discovery from 4 days ago. Remember, I knew this 5 years ago, but my recent discovery just had me make a video. It's like all the evidence is in. I've just got a mountain of evidence to prove that I have. Yeah, I know it sounds hubristic, but I do have, the first time you will ever see it on Earth, the missing principle of light. This would be our blue wavelength. This would be our green. And this would be our red. And everything before that and after that. This would be our white light. Notice pulse, 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 pulse. Oh, why is the shorter wavelength, higher frequency light more destructive? Because it carries more dielectricity. EV. Power. Power. All about power. It's a system, just like a drill bit. Imagine these were all drill bits. Add more power. More revolutions. More power. More dangerous. Oh my God, you're starting to make sense. I don't like when people make sense. I'm used to quantum bullshit and unicorn particles, you know? I don't like it when people make sense. It scares me. You just made it too simple, you know? Like, you know, a child could kind of explain stuff like this. The photon does not exist. Here is our electromagnetic shorter wavelength, high frequency. Longer wavelength, longer frequency. Low frequency, excuse me. Making another video when I'm late again. Low frequency, longer wavelength. Shorter frequency, higher frequency, shorter wavelength. Look, oh look, we have more dielectric pulses over here. Yes, that's correct. This explains why you get deflection in prisms at the shorter wavelength, higher frequencies. This would be our blue. This would be our red. This would be our green. My experiment from a few days ago, I've got 6 proofs now, and along with another person's invention. The formulas, which are endless. 2 PhDs, very well acclaimed, Dr. Ola Deflection, Maxwell's work, Faraday's work, Tesla's work. They all imply the same thing. Self-induction is absolutely impossible. My experiment the other day proved that using RGB LEDs, which are emitting white light, only all 3 colors were along the dielectric inertial plane, and either pole was painted, different phase shift of the light, a different color. And red over here, green over here, only blue with the dielectric. The shorter wavelength, higher frequency blue has higher dielectric capacitance. That's why it is affected by the dielectric inertial plane of a magnet more than is the red or the green. So here we have our blue. This is the misunderstanding of the notion of a photon, of a quanta, a packet of light. This is the unification of wave-particle duality BS, the unification of the photoelectric effects correct observations, but 100% incorrect conclusions. This explains magnetic deflection of light, which is an absolute fact. It cannot be denied. This explains the dispersion in a prism. It explains dispersion. It explains diffusion. It explains the slowing inductive, the inductance, the dielectric inductance in certain media. It explains light polarization. Photons don't exist. The notion of the quanta and the photon comes from this. The wave-particle duality nonsense is gone. Maybe it sounds like a weird name. I call it QM, or quasi-matter, which is basically what light is. It has three components. This is why light stays stable over millions of light years from galaxies far, far away. Yeah, there's a Star Wars reference for you. Electricity and magnetism alone cannot exist. Such a system is electromagnetically impossible. Magnetism is radiation. Electricity terminates as magnetism. If we were to create electromagnetism, it would be gone before it began. Remember our drop in the water? Our drop in the pond there? Nature's been screaming to you the whole time. Say we have power. We apply the power at certain frequencies using certain media to the ether plane. We get a resultant wave pattern of electricity and magnetism and a resultant dielectric. Here we have our electromagnetic wavefronts at certain frequencies and wavelengths, which travel radially, inducing a pulse relative to the wavelength and frequency. So now all we have to do is turn that on its side so you can get a better look. Here we have our ripples of EM. And here we have our dielectric pulses. Remember, the smaller the space, the greater the capacitance. That's how dielectricity works. Dielectricity is centripetal, it is counterspatial, it is inertial. This is where our energy comes from. This is Mother Nature's energy. Remember, electricity is not Mother Nature's electricity. Yes, she creates electricity, but dielectricity comes first. Magnetism is spatial. It is radiation. It is a termination of either electricity or dielectricity. There's no such thing as a negative charge. There's only discharge. This is, right here, what I'm drawing over and over again, the missing secret behind all confusion about light and the creation of a sick, perverted cult of rehashed Greek atomism, quantum mechanics, general relativity, and its bullshit. This unites wave-particle duality, it unites the Faraday effect, it explains the photoelectric effect, it explains diffusion, it explains dispersion, it explains polarization, it explains the slowing down of light through certain inductive media based upon its dielectric capacitance. This is the missing secret of light. You've seen it here first. You'll never read about this anywhere else. How did I get this? Greek retroduction, logic, reading Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside. Intelligent people like this, although he never came to that conclusion. He's got the formulas for proving that electromagnetic induction by itself, self-induction, is absolutely impossible. And it is impossible. We know the nature of electricity, magnetism, and gravity, what they are. Electromagnetism is impossible. It cannot exist. Magnetism is radiation. Electricity terminates as magnetism. The notion that transverse electromagnetism, the electromagnetic spectrum, is purely electromagnetic without a z-axis radiodielectric component to sustain the entire structure like the spine in your back. It is impossible. It just sits there like a jellyfish with no spine. It can't do anything. Gravity, mass, dielectricity, and electricity, which does not exist on its own, neither does gravity or mass. These are the two principles in the universe, dielectricity and magnetism, the two modalities of the ether and the resultants, electricity and gravity and magnetism. Magnetism is spatial. Dielectricity is counterspatial, is inertial, is centripetal, electrostatics. Everything over here is termination. Everything here is generation. Electricity and magnetism cannot exist by themselves. It is impossible. Here is light, right here. Everything here is necessary for light to exist. All the way from gamma, all the way to infrared, RGB visible. The entire electromagnetic spectrum necessitates a z-axis radial dielectric component. It is impossible. There is not one person on this earth that can bring forward the math to show me that electromagnetism can exist and self-induced. Wave-particle duality nonsense has been eliminated. It is impossible. You cannot have electricity and magnetism self-conjugating each other. It's ridiculous. This is the confusion of the quanta, or what they call the photon. You take one section of quanta, or they call it a wave packet of light. Already it looks like it has, from our observations and experiments, a particle-like quality and a wave-like quality. Yes, dumbass, here's the wave-like quality right here, the transverse electricity and magnetism. Well, it exhibits over very short periods of time a particle-like property. Yes, idiot. That is because of the dielectric pulse, which occurs at the z-axis radial of the electromagnetic, which is dielectromagnetic. Dielectro-electromagnetism would be probably the correct name for it, although it's hard to say. I kind of referred to it as quasi-matter. Well, that sounds kind of ridiculous, you know, quasi-matter, you know? Well, let's just think of it as jello versus a rock. Man, that still makes no sense. Here's the quanta, okay? Transverse component, transverse component. This is the backbone, the spine of everything in electromagnetism. It cannot exist any other way. Same thing as a coaxial cable. It's a coaxial cable, which Oliver Heaviside invented, by the way. Go figure that one. No coincidence at all. This is the nature of light. You've seen it here first. This is the second part. I don't know if we're making another one because I've got so many experiments to do. My huge discovery of last week, 3 items I'm seeking a potential patent on, or at least investigating a patent for. Finish up the 3rd edition of the book. I only wrote this as an afterthought to prove because I knew that all the data was in. I've got 6 experiments now along with other people's experiments, but nobody's come up with this. Even Tesla, Heaviside, nobody wrote about this. But light can only be this. It is impossible for it to be any other way. If you want to bring someone to argue that, fine, but they won't win the argument. Not because I said so, because it is impossible. Electricity and magnetism on their own do not exist. This is the nature of light. The power is proportional to the wavelength and the frequency. That's why all the stuff over here on the electromagnetic spectrum will kill your ass. And everything here is visible light. It's okay to look at. Up to a point. Over here we have our infrared. Pulse, 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 pulse. This is all the dangerous stuff over here that will kill you, will nuke you. Well, you know, what was that simpler chart you had before? You know, you kind of explained it simply. Remember, there's no strong nuclear force. That's a misunderstanding of dielectricity. There are only 4 modalities of the ether: circular, spatial, centripetal, centrifugal. We have radial, circular, spatial, and counterspatial. Magnetism, spatial. Dielectricity, counterspatial. These are the 2 core principles of the universe. Down here we have gravity, mass. Now it's accumulatively spatial, but its field is counterspatial. That's because it is a product of dielectricity and magnetism together. Up here we have electricity, the same thing. It is the conglomeration, the product of dielectricity and magnetism. Phi times psi equals Q Planck electrification. Electromagnetism cannot exist. Well, all my textbooks have been saying for the past 80 years that is the nature of light. You know, we have a photon, and a wave packet, and we have wave particle duality. No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works, idiot. Here we have matter, termination, radiation. Everything that makes mass massive is solely due to this. You can't get massiveness out of any atom out of dielectricity. Dielectricity is not radiation, it is charge. Magnetism is discharge. DC is in AC versus DC. And here we have, look at light. Up here, all this is light. Transverse electrical, transverse magnetic, Z-axis radial dielectric. That is the nature of light. If you don't like it, too bad. I love slaughtering sacred cows, but I'm only interested in being a truth seeker. I'm not interested in rocking someone's boat or kicking them in the behind, although I kind of do that in debate sometimes, but it's about being a truth seeker. Having a wholly open mind is good up to a point. Having a closed mind is only good up to a point. You have an open mind up to the point where you let everything in, including the rapists and the murderers, and you've got a mind that is soon trashed. If you got a closed mind, it's only good up to the point where you let nothing in, including the truth, the big T. I only care about the big T. So a wholly open mind and a wholly closed mind are bad. That's why it's important to have a gatekeeper of the mind that knows the prostitutes, the hookers, and the drug dealers from the wisdom and the intelligence. And unfortunately, nobody was brought up learning Greek Platonism or retroductive methodology, but just like our drop in the pond, we create energy, we create a ripple in the ether, the plane of the ether, and we get a little drop up here. Turn that sideways, multiply it depending upon the frequency and the wavelength, and look at, you have transverse dielectromagnetism, or the correct nature of light. It is not electromagnetic. It necessitates, absolutely without any question, nobody can debate that on this earth, that light has a z-axis radial dielectric component. No photons. A photon was just a name given to explain away the wave-particle duality phenomena as witnessed in looking at light through many experiments. That so-called photon is a dielectric pulse. Well, we see wave-like properties of light depending on the experiment, and we see particle-like properties. Yes, because of this idiot. Right here. We take one section, or quanta, in your terminology, in the cult of quantum, and we have transverse electrical, transverse magnetic, and a dielectric pulse, which in experiments acts like, for lack of a better word, a particle. Here you have it for the first time on Earth. You've seen it, the correct geometry, the correct and accurate explanation of light. It explains wave-particle duality, the Faraday effect, the photoelectric effect. It explains magnetic deflection of light, explains prisms, explains diffusion, dispersion. It explains why light is able to stay stable over thousands of light years because of dielectricity. Why is light able to stay stable over thousands of light years? Because dielectricity is counterspatial. Oh my God, perfect sense. Hallelujah, thank goodness. Thanks for watching.